Let's talk about more with the food shortage that's going to be coming your way. So we've had the obvious issue with the shipping lanes going on. We've been talking about that. There's lots of channels talking about that. That doesn't seem to be getting any better. The shipping issue is going to continue out through 2022, and I don't think it's going to alleviate for several years. If it does at all, we may just be developing a new kind of standard of shipping. We'll see how that rolls out, and that's a different discussion. But it certainly doesn't look like it's going to get any better in 2022. 2022, if anything, it's going to stay the same, may get a little bit worse. The average food that you eat at the grocery store travels about 1,200 miles before it reaches you. That's why the food that we find at the grocery store is significantly lacking in nutrition and flavor. Case in point, the tomatoes that you purchase. Tomatoes that you purchase from the grocery store are generally, they travel a long ways, so they have to have the toughness of cardboard to be able to travel those distances and not wind up as a bruising mush. Because of that, they tend to have the flavor of cardboard. They have about 50% of the nutrition that like a heritage breed, a natural breed, what am I thinking of? Heirloom, thank you. Heirloom, an heirloom seed tomato would have, they have about half the nutrition, and with that about half the flavor. So that's why they all taste like cardboard. And you don't have to do a blind taste test, y'all. Pick up an heirloom tomato plant and compare it next to a farm-raised plant or a traditional, basically genetically modified plant, even if it's not factory modified, and you'll find that they don't even look like tomatoes anymore. We've raised both here, and the heirloom plants are night and day difference. And so more than this issue aside, for the shipping issue, we put this issue aside. We buy, let's just say, for instance, you take my advice, you buy as much as you can locally. You start finding local farmers and local producers that you can purchase from. Put all that aside, you're still going to be dealing with a food shortage. Now, right now, it doesn't look like it's going to hit the broad of us soon, but it is going to hit us, looks like, over time. What's happening in areas like, I believe it's Massachusetts and California now that have both passed this legislation, and what the legislation is changing the way that factory farms work. They're basically trying to outlaw CAFOs. For those of you that don't do ranching, that's a confined area feeding operations, what that stands for. And what those are is those are nasty areas. They put lots of animals in very small areas to where the animals, if they're not on medicine constantly, they'll actually end up dying. There was a study done that found that about 25% of the cattle in those facilities will just die within about 3 days if they take them off of the antibiotics that they're on. The antibiotics in the feed is because they're basically living in their own feces, and it's pretty nasty. The stuff that they're eating is even worse. It's a whole different discussion, guys. I can go on for days about that. I personally find them unethical, and that's part of the reason why we don't raise that way, and why I have a problem in general with this this whole feeding operation, mass production of how we do beef and pork and poultry in this country. I think it's very wrong. CAFOs are already illegal in a lot of the other more westernized world. So you go over to many countries in Europe. I think the EU may have banned them entirely, but many countries in Europe I know do as an individual rule. The same ones that don't allow genetically modified foods and stuff like that. But we have gotten used to it here. So that's where the food shortage comes in. It's not that small farms like ours can't sustain the country. Actually, we would do it better, and it would actually be much, much better for the environment because we don't have the waste. Our land can absorb the waste. The issue is that the infrastructure right now is not currently set up to do that because we have built this system around these confined area feeding operations, and so we have to have them to be able to provide the beef, the pork, and the poultry for the nation. So if we can transition to this little by little, actually would be more ethically raised meat. You would end up getting a lot more people eating meat because you'll get vegetarians that are vegetarians for ethical reasons, like my sister-in-law will start to then transfer over to a healthier diet with meat in it. But the way it has to be done is actually the key here. Right now you got California and Massachusetts that have just completely banned it, and they're saying, hey, no more of these, which is going to raise the price on eggs, it's going to raise the price on dairy, and it's going to raise it because the farms that are producing this If you're a farm that is doing a feeding operation, you now have to provide more space, which means let's say they doubled the amount of space that's required, which is still not very much. You would now have half the production on that same feeding operation, which is going to raise the price in the end. And it would force Walmart to either buy locally, which they're not going to do, or to just raise the price on their shelf, which is what they'll do. So for the small farmers like me, my prices are not changing with these regulations because we're raising the same way. It doesn't affect us. And the 20% of us out there that purchase feed or our food from small farmers like that, your meat will not be affected. Our meat is substantially higher quality and substantially cheaper than what you can purchase for the equivalent amount at Walmart. Difference is you have to purchase it in bulk because you're buying a half a cow or a whole cow, and so you have to have the deep freezer and a little bit of space to do that. It's a much better option, but you do have to purchase in bulk, and not a lot of people can fathom dropping $1,500 or $3,000 on their meat for the year all at one time. It takes your brain a minute to adjust to that. And especially when we're used to just going to the grocery store once a week. But think about it this way. I don't have to go to the grocery store for meat ever again that year. I go one time and it's all done. And it's cheaper and it's better quality. So that's where this comes into play, is that the small farmers like us, we won't raise our prices for this. You may raise your prices to be competitive in the market and to make a better profit margin, but I don't need to raise my prices. I can be competitive, and I would honestly rather be slightly cheaper than Walmart's because it is a harder product to sell because you have to sell in bulk. And so I would rather my meat be a little bit cheaper than that, even though it is a higher quality. I have all the aces in my hand then if I'm higher quality and cheaper. So that's where I want to be at, and that's where a lot of us do want to be at. So this new regulation that's coming into play is probably going to eventually take all 50 states. Now, it may take 20 years before a state like Alabama develops that, but I suspect on some level it'll hit the federal, especially if the progressives remain in power after the 2022 election, which is, again, we're not going into the politics of it. If they remain in power at the 2022 election, you can see this getting passed between now and 2024. And I don't actually disagree with this law because I think that it is unethical, and I think that if we don't rein in the businesses to have ethical standards for their animal treatment, then we'll just continue on this path. And the health benefits are substantial in that you're not eating a bunch of animals that are completely loaded with toxins. So that's why, on a principle level, I do agree with this. The issue is going to be the implementation of it, and the bigger question is, how much authority do we want to give our government? And that's always the problem with any type of regulation we pass is the juice worth the squeeze? Do we want to regulate this and risk having the government be able to gain this much more power? Because government doesn't gain power overnight. We don't get dictator governments overnight. It happens little by little, and then all of a sudden. And so that's what we have to look at with it. And laws like this, again, we're just giving more and more authority over to the federal government. What would be better is if the ranchers would say, hey, we're just going to raise ethically, and we're going to give our animals enough space that they can be animals, that a pig can be a pig, they can root around out in the pasture, they can go after grubs, they can get those things that make the meat much better quality, and that we're going to allow them to be raised in a healthy way. The one interesting thing about this is this is a progressive agenda, right? So it's not the conservatives that tend to push this agenda as a progressive agenda. The problem is that the progressives are also backed by Monsanto, which owns a lot of these patents for various different, like your Roundups and stuff like that. So they get backed by those same companies that are making that are exacerbating this issue. So it's a very interesting kind of conundrum that they're going to be in here with whether they need to push this forward or not. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens. But right now it's happening in Massachusetts and California. If we do it state by state, it's probably not going to be that big of an issue. The one interesting thing about the California law is that they're not allowing the import of meats from states that don't do this. So from right now, if this all goes into effect, which it looks like it is, in California, they will only accept meat from Massachusetts because Massachusetts is the only one that's making the same standard. As of right now, they can't just drive meat in from somewhere else. California uses up about 16% of the nation's pork, if I remember correctly. That was the latest statistic on it. So it's a substantial hit to the pork operation. 80% of it comes from within California, which means they're going to have to make some changes here coming up on the way that they do this, because it is going to require a little bit more land or a little bit more active management, one of the two. We actually raise more cows on our property than what you would do in even maybe a feeding operation of certain sizes, and it's simply because we rotate them around. They're put on fresh pasture, and we are actively managing them, and that's going to be required in order to implement these systems and still be able to feed everybody. So it's an interesting problem, because it's a problem that both sides have come up with a solution to a different problem, and the problem is actually neither one of them are correct on what the problem is. The problem is that we need to encourage farmers to actively manage their land and their ranches and teach these alternative ideas of management, rather than just load them with ivermectin, load them with antibiotics, load them with growth hormones, put them on grain, fatten them up, and send them off to the butcher. Yeah, that makes money, but it's not an ethical way to do it, and it doesn't produce a good quality meat. Our meat is, you can compare it by the color, the taste, everything is far superior to that, and every local producer is going to be like that, that raises their either straight on pasture or pasture with some grain supplement. It's just going to be a lot better. Anyways, guys, I think that's it. Went on a little bit longer than I wanted to with this video, so make sure and like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. We'll go ahead and get some more videos out, and I'm going to be working on a few more here this afternoon. So again, see the same shirt, same hat, that's why. Thanks for watching.